The plane flying through the evening sky was filled with the usual hum of engines and the soft buzz of air conditioning. Most passengers leaned back in their seats, preparing for sleep, but the atmosphere in the cabin was far from calm. Among them, at the very end of the row, sat Donald Trump. He looked as usual, a sharp suit, hair that didn't budge even in strong winds. At first glance, he seemed just like another businessman on a trip. But many people behind him noticed how difficult it was for him to adhere to the norms of behavior. Recently, during the flight, a flight attendant named Catherine, working on this plane, gathered all her courage when she saw Trump in her service area. She had heard rumors about his bold behavior in public places, but this time, her patience snapped. Catherine, an experienced flight attendant, couldn't help but notice how Trump rudely demanded better service, which caused unease among those around him. As he ordered another drink, Catherine, feeling the pressure rise, couldn't take it anymore. She walked up to him with an unmistakably cold expression on her face, but with a firm intention to do everything possible to make him realize his behavior. Catherine tried to remain polite. "Mr. Trump, excuse me, but perhaps you could lower your voice? Other passengers are already uncomfortable, and I would like your requests not to disturb their peace." Trump looked at her with a displeased expression, his eyes darkening like a storm on the horizon. "What do you want from me, stewardess?" His voice was cold, but his dismissive tone left no doubt that he wasn't about to accept such a request. "I paid for this ticket, and I'm entitled to service that matches my status." Catherine took a deep breath, trying to remain calm, and continued, "I understand, sir, but we must take care of all passengers, not just one. We're simply asking you to follow basic etiquette rules." And then something changed. Donald Trump, known for his uncompromising behavior, wasn't used to situations like this. He frowned and then stood up. For a moment, it seemed like he was about to explode. However, instead of yelling or threatening, he leaned forward slightly and asked, "Do you really want me to apologize for wanting normal service? I'm not here to listen to your lectures." Catherine felt her heart race. She understood that this moment could be decisive. But instead of giving in to emotions, she took it to a new level. She simply looked him in the eye and said, "No, sir, I'm not asking for an apology. I'm only asking you to show respect for others, as you would for yourself. That's all I ask." Trump paused, his breath caught. He felt that he couldn't just leave it without a reaction. He was struck by her calmness, her persistence, which was not aggressive but wise. It was becoming more tense, but not lost. But the most interesting thing about this situation was that, after a few seconds, Trump frowned and quietly said, "Fine, I'll give a chance. But that doesn't mean I'm satisfied with the situation." Catherine just nodded, but in her heart, a small spark of hope awakened. Perhaps this moment had changed something bigger than she could imagine. Trump felt the cold gaze of the flight attendant pierce him as she stood before him, blushing slightly. He could almost physically feel the tension in the air. Everything around him seemed to quiet down. Even the hum of the engines felt distant and unimportant. Something was shifting in the atmosphere. It was as if an invisible charge of tension had taken over control. "Do you really think you can throw me off this plane?" Trump thought, considering his next move. He felt audacious, ready for a challenge. Although he had never allowed himself to back down in situations like this, there was something different in the flight attendant's eyes. Her seriousness seemed extraordinarily personal, and it caused an internal tension in him. What made her act like this? And why was she willing to risk her position, facing someone like him? "You can't lay a hand on me." His voice was calm, but there was already a hint of readiness for confrontation. The flight attendant held her breath, and it seemed as though she understood that this moment could change everything. She stood so close that Trump could even smell the faint fragrance of her perfume mixing with the air in the cabin. In her eyes, there was more than just professional outrage. There was something that made him pause. Meanwhile, a few passengers from the back rows started whispering nervously. Trump caught a couple of murmured phrases, with the words Trump and scandal being mentioned. But he no longer paid attention to the details. He was solely focused on her. "What do you think you'll do next?" she continued, as if testing him. Her tone had turned sharp, but still professional. Trump smiled. He wasn't going to show weakness. "You think you won't be punished for this?" He raised his eyebrows, feeling like a tiger in a cage, ready to fight. Her gaze changed. Now it wasn't just indignation, there was determination, a readiness to fight to the end. "I'm not afraid of you," she replied, standing as if ready to face any challenge. Her voice remained clear, though there was a spark of anger in her eyes. She took a step back, her hands showing no sign of anxiety. The flight attendant was completely calm, though she looked like she was on the verge of despair. The passengers on the plane began to notice the tension between them. Those sitting closer exchanged looks, and you could almost feel how the microscopic shifts were affecting the dynamic. Someone nervously mumbled, "This is more than just a seating conflict." Trump increased the distance between them, watching her reaction. He understood that this was not just an argument. Something far more important lay behind it. The flight attendant was part of something bigger, and he intended to figure it out. "You don't believe I can change your life right here, do you?" Trump asked, looking her in the eye. Every word was clear and cold, as if a challenge for a fight. Her lips tightened, and her eyes narrowed into a thin line. "You think I'm afraid of your power? No. You won't break me, Trump, not this time." Each word from the flight attendant resonated heavily in his mind. This wasn't just a conflict between two people. It was the beginning of something bigger. The tension in the cabin grew, and now all the passengers were witnesses to how a small scene was turning into a battleground for principles. Trump felt that this moment could not only affect him, but it could change the course of events on the plane. If he let the flight attendant win this battle, what would that mean for his future? And if she lost, what would happen to her and everyone who saw this? Trump stood with his eyebrows raised, his gaze thoughtful, but inside him a storm was raging. All the passengers around him could feel how each moment grew heavier. The flight attendant didn't look away. Her hands remained hidden behind her back, but every movement she made was filled with inner readiness to resist. She was so calm that it became even more menacing. The tension in the plane reached its peak. A few people started glancing around, some even nervously swallowing, looking at Trump but not daring to move. "I don't want to cause trouble, but I won't let this go," the flight attendant spoke again, her voice calm but filled with barely restrained anger. "I know who you are, but that doesn't mean I'm afraid of you." Trump felt his heart rate quicken. It was unusual for him to hear such words from someone he considered a small part of this vast machine, a simple airline worker. But now this was no longer just a conflict between a passenger and a flight attendant. It was a test of patience, and who held more influence in this situation. "You still don't understand who you're dealing with." His voice remained cold and low, as if each word could pierce the air. He moved closer, reaching a point beyond which there was no turning back. The flight attendant stepped forward, leaving a small space between them, and her eyes sharpened again, as though she were making a decision. "I know you're trying to show your power, but you know what?" Her words cut through the silence. "Your power doesn't matter here. All the passengers are watching you. And if you don't stop this game, you'll not only ruin your trip, but you'll push them to make a decision." Trump felt an invisible force tighten around his chest. He realized that even for him, this had become a challenge that could lead to significant consequences. All these eyes, all this attention on how he behaved. They were watching every move he made. And this was more than just a choice between winning and losing. It was a choice between being completely ruthless and allowing his reputation to sink. "Are you willing to take this on?" Trump shot her a look, and in his eyes was something that even he couldn't explain. The flight attendant paused, her lips tightening, and her hands became as solid as stone. She seemed to be taking a risk, completely disregarding the circumstances. "Yes, I'm willing." Her response was clear, without a doubt. Trump understood that she was ready for more than just stopping him. She could change everything, everything that mattered to him. And this moment was even more dangerous than he could have imagined. He felt a whole spectrum of possible scenarios racing toward a finale, and he might not survive it. But the passengers were already on the edge. A few people began to rise from their seats, turning toward him and the flight attendant, as if this had become a spectacle. In their eyes, there was curiosity, but also fear that this could spiral out of control. And now, in the air, it wasn't just the hum of the engines that filled the space, it was the atmosphere of a battle for one's place. Trump took a step back, but didn't retreat. His gaze became even more threatening, and though he kept himself in check, a sly expression appeared on his face. "This isn't your game," he spoke again. "But you'll soon understand that I can influence everyone on this plane." And as soon as he said this, it became clear that the situation was beyond control, not just for the flight attendant and Trump, but for everyone witnessing this battle. Trump felt the blood pulsing in his veins, and the pressure inside the plane became unbearable. He took a few steps back, but his heart was still racing. The passengers on board remained silent, each feeling that the atmosphere was about to explode. The flight attendant looked at him again, her expression resolute. She had no intention of backing down, and her gaze, though composed, became even colder. She knew that if she didn't stop this now, the situation could lead to real chaos, not only on board, but far beyond the plane. "Go back to your seat." Her voice was firm, like an order. "You won't be able to control this flight the way you want." Trump was surprised by her determination. His fingers clenched into fists for a moment, but he realized that he no longer had the strength to see this through. He didn't want to become a symbol of something terrifying, something that couldn't be stopped. The air around them grew thicker. Trump turned and walked back to his seat, feeling how every gaze from the passengers was about to turn into a judgment. Perhaps he really couldn't control everything. The flight attendant stood still, feeling the nervous tension easing. She made a brief gesture for the other flight attendants to calm the passengers and returned to her duties. She hadn't let the incident win, but she hadn't forgotten that there would always be those who would try to disrupt order. She knew that in every conflict, there's a solution to be found, even if it's a difficult one. The passengers on board remained in tense silence, but most understood. Essentially, they had witnessed something greater than just a fight for control. They had experienced a moment that changed their perception not only of this flight, but also of human will, determination, and responsibility. And though the plane continued its journey, each of them carried with them the memory of the time when the tension was at its peak, and the struggle for control wasn't just a fight between people, but between principles themselves. The flight continued, but the atmosphere in the plane remained uneasy until the end of the journey.